All right, next up, Unit 3, Section 2, the crime scene team. All right, so when a crime scene is being accessed, there are certain people that are going to be allowed access to that crime scene. They are the first police officer on the scene, the medics, if necessary, investigators, medical examiner, photographer and field techs, and then possibly lab experts. So let's go through that. SOCO stands for the Scene of Crime Officer. So let's look at that first. So the Scene of Crime Officer is first officer on the crime scene. The first officer has a lot of duties. They have to potentially save a human life, or multiple, but they also have the risk of damaging and permanently ruining evidence. So a good cardinal rule to remember is eyes open, mouth shut, and hands in the pockets. Eyes open, you want to be able to observe everything that you see. Mouth shut, you don't want to talk to anybody. If you're a first responder on the scene, even just interacting with people can change things. We know from our talks about eyewitness testimonies, we know that memory is pliable, and you can lose memory. Memories can be replaced by other people's suggestions and comments and things like that. So, and then hands in the pocket. This is just don't touch anything. Just an awareness that what you're doing can affect that crime scene. So, 5-letter anagram that can help us remember this is ADAPT. Assess the crime scene and assist those that are hurt, detain the witness, arrest the perpetrator if possible, then protect the crime scene, then take notes. Obviously, one of the most important things, yes, it's most important to save a human life. In the event that something happens where there's a victim, they're still alive, you don't want to sit there and let the victim bleed out because you're like, well, I don't want to touch the evidence. Okay, be aware of it, but save the human life, because an eyewitness can be very valuable, even though eyewitness testimonies can be manipulated and not always reliable. It's always good to have an eyewitness, especially if it's the victim. All right, medics. Now, medics are only going to be there, obviously, if there's somebody still alive. If nobody is left alive at the crime scene, you're not going to need medics. But a couple cool things about, interesting things about medics that you may not already know, and they're part of the EMS grouping, so Emergency Medical Services. We have both EMTs and paramedics. An EMT and a paramedic, both of them have the ability to save human lives, but they do have a couple key differences. An EMT has a lot less coursework that's done, and also in terms of their practice and the scope of their practice there, they can't break skin. So there's no, they can't do an IV, they can't cut open or remove or do emergency surgery on anybody. They're limited in what they can do to help save that life. They're trained to do CPR and defib paddles and things like that, but they are limited. An actual paramedic, a ton more coursework. Obviously, they have basically a clearance to do a whole lot more than an EMT. Now, an EMT is going to show up on usually firefighters are going to be EMT certified. So when they show up at a crime scene, they're going to be able to do those emergency things that need doing until a paramedic can show up and take over. Medical examiners. Medical examiners are often going to be called to the crime scene, and a couple things to be aware of. The difference between a medical examiner and a coroner. A medical examiner is a medical doctor. Okay, it's usually going to be a pathologist, and the important point here is they're appointed. Okay, so this person is appointed to this position, which means that they are going to have certain credentials. They're going to have certain qualifications. A coroner is an elected official. Okay, and we all know with current elections and things that we're aware of in the political system, it is political, and you can be elected as a coroner and have absolutely no medical training at all. So of the two, if you were going to pick one that you want to actually have show up at a crime scene with you, you're definitely going to want to have it be the medical examiner, or the ME. You're not going to want to have that coroner called. Okay. Now, downside is there's only about 400 certified forensic pathologists that are medical examiners in the country. So it may not always be possible to get an ME there. Sometimes, a coroner may be called. Other downside is because they don't have any special medical training, a coroner also doesn't have any training in forensics in terms of retaining evidence and certain things to look for. So, there's a risk if a coroner shows up. There's always going to be a risk that, maybe something doesn't happen the right way or evidence gets tainted or destroyed. So what's the job of the medical examiner? Well, they have to obviously identify the deceased. Once that's done, then they'll eventually, further down, notify next of kin, which is, I would imagine, one of the worst possible jobs ever. What they're also going to be doing is determining time and date of death. You're going to learn how to do that, the medical cause of death, the COD, and the mechanism and the manner. Cause, mechanism, manner, those are all very different. And we're going to talk through that. We're going to talk about what's the difference between a cause of death and a mechanism of death versus a manner of death, and it can get kind of confusing. We'll work through all that. But that's going to be the job of the medical examiner. Also going to be showing up are going to be investigators and field techs. Interesting quote. The wise forensic investigator will always remember that he must bring all of his life experiences and logic to find the truth. This means common sense, informed intuition, and the courage to see things as they are. Then he must speak honestly about what it adds up to. Just a couple little points on this that are interesting. You can't deny life experience. You can't deny that someone is going to come and experience something with some predispositions. But that also has to be filtered with things like common sense, your own intuition, and then seeing things how they are. And here's what's interesting. A lot of times you may get to a crime scene as an investigator, and you may collect evidence, and that evidence is pointing to a person that you think is ultimately not at fault. It's not your job. It is not your job to determine fault. It's not your job to determine punishment or penalty. It's your job as a forensic investigator to analyze the evidence and report what it finds. And so maybe the evidence points to a 14-year-old girl that was she's a sweet girl and she did some kind of crime, and she's going to get processed for it. And you think, well, she shouldn't be charged. She's innocent. She's got her whole life ahead of her. Well, that's not your job to do. Okay, so just an interesting little thing on that. A field tech, to qualify it, is somebody that is trained in a single or multiple fields. Almost always you're going to have a crime scene team that's made up of multiple field techs. So they'll come as a group or at least with a partner to help maintain chain of custody and have accountability and things like that. The actions of these people can make or break a case. What this means is that if they process evidence incorrectly, if evidence is tainted or destroyed, if chain of custody isn't maintained, there are just a lot of ways that that all this can just be that you can lose evidence, and ultimately that could cause you to lose a case. Some areas that a field tech may specialize in, and you guys will actually learn some of these methods. Evidence collection we'll talk about. Note taking, the idea of like stream of consciousness is what I like to refer it to. So you basically write down everything that you see. You don't talk. You just write. Photography. There's actually specially trained forensics photographers, and you heard that in the movie that we watched. Crime scene team sketches are going to be made, and also measurements, and this is something that we're going to work on. There's actually a formal process for making a crime scene sketch. There's a formal process for how you have to measure out a crime scene. And then videography as well, and this is interesting just because it's kind of a newer field, but even in my experiences, I had an officer tell me that the picture is great, a video is better. So that is a specialized field as well. And then occasionally you're going to have lab experts, and these are going to be people that are highly specialized, highly qualified to process certain pieces of evidence. And this may only happen in high-profile cases. It can't be everywhere at once, and not every case needs somebody with a unique specialization. But occasionally it's going to happen, and a lab expert may be called out to the crime scene as well.